Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And we are very excited to showcase this next guest here on our network, so sit back, strap in, and get ready for a wonderful ride. And on the line with us today, we have Rahul Manchanda. We'll be discussing his wonderful book, Deep State Defector 4. Available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. And guys, make sure you're doing yourself a favor and you look into the 3 previous books that he has written as well in the series. And I will say that Rahul was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business. Sweetspire Literature Management. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, do yourself a favor and contact Sweetspire. You can find out more information on them at sweetspireliterature.com. And guys, it is an absolute pleasure to have Rahul here on the line with us, okay? Now, when you go to his Amazon, his Barnes & Noble page, you start to do any research on the book, you understand instantly what we're going to be discussing today. Now, it could be viewed as a controversial book in terms of some of the subject matter that we're going to be discussing. Now, whether you fall politically on the right, on the left, all of that is irrelevant. At the end of the day, it's all about opening your mind and really seeing another side of things. So Rahul is not going to definitively say one thing or the other and how you should think or how you should believe. Really just laying out some information for you to take and you do what you will with it. And I'm very much looking forward to all of this. I know you are as well. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Rahul, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction and thank you so much for being a guest. How are you?
Wonderful. Thanks for inviting me to this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're very much looking forward to this. And I know we have so much information to cover. I mean, you have 4 books, okay? We're going to focus on the 4th installment today, but there is so much fantastic information to cover. Before we go into the book itself, though, let's hold off slightly, Rahul. First and foremost, start by giving us a little more information on yourself and your background, please.
Yes, sir. So, I'm kind of like, I'm an American citizen. I was born in New York in 1972. I'm an attorney for 20 years, federal, state, local. I do criminal defense. I do immigration law, deportation defense, and I do family law and civil rights. Mm-hmm. I'm a man of color, yet at the same time, I guess I'm considered, I don't know what you would consider me, but at the same time, I've been a lawyer and a litigant. I've had a lot of interesting experiences over the last 20, 30 years, actually 49, 50 years of my life with a certain vantage point. And I've seen things as an insider, both in D.C. and in the way the country runs and around the world through my travels. And I've sort of distilled my observations into a couple books, things that really drive me crazy, hitting walls that I can't seem to get over because they're built into and baked into the system.
Absolutely. Certain
corruptions, certain glass ceilings, if you will, literally baked into the system and insurmountable with complaints or lawsuits or whatnot. And I've just decided to write a book about it so as to publicize my findings, my investigatory findings. And some of them aren't so pleasant. Some of them will make you happy. Some of them will make you angry. Some of them will make you laugh. But because I've been trained as a lawyer for so long, I really don't say or write anything that I can't prove 100,000 times over. And in a lot of ways, writing something like this has been a catharsis for my life. And that's really what it is. We can dive into it if you'd like to discuss anything specific.
Absolutely. That the next place that I wanted to go, Rahul, was really going to be inspiration. And you've already started to go there with that last statement and how this process has almost been cathartic for you. Now, you know what happens when you assume, Rahul, so I'm not going to do that. I have you here on the line. I can just come right out and ask. Explain to us what you mean a little bit in a little more detail when you say that it has been cathartic. Did you feel that this information you were compiling over the years, you almost felt an obligation to put this out?
Yes, sir, I did. And the reason that I did is because, for example, I joined the Freemasons, and it's sort of like before I really knew what it was all about. And there's certain things that we, did, for example, sitting in a room with a skull and candle and an hourglass, and how do you define your life and your destiny?
Wow.
And in a lot of ways, what is your destiny? What is your life's work? And it really is about light and truth and illumination, if you will.
Absolutely.
And the reality is a lot of people out there in the billions that are totally frustrated, but there's a very small amount of people that thrive on the system that we live in, whether it's the United States or Europe or really even around the world. And it's really unfair. I personally am against that. I would like the world to be illuminated. I don't really like the world to be manipulated by a small cabal of individuals.
Absolutely.
Who have access to the levers of power. And I really don't like to read about or see millions or billions of people dying or suffering or starving because of that. I think that the more knowledge, the more illumination, the more light shed on the inner workings of these small groups of individuals can only improve the world that we live in and help them defend themselves.
Right.
God forbid if they're put into a position where they have to choose to survive or not. And that's really what this is about. Liberation and illumination, and to bring out the light for the masses, for more people, rather than have them believe the nonsense they're fed 24/7 by the mainstream media or the courts, federal, state, or local, or the legislative, bought and paid for politicians, and the lobbying groups. I mean, it's all just nonsense. And I think that, even the founding fathers, you talk about the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, they all talked about, illumination, that if people are going to remain free, they need to be educated. They need to be made aware of what's happening in the world. That's the only way that freedom can be maintained. And it quickly devolves into communism or socialism or tyranny or death or the Dark Ages if people aren't aware of what's really happening around them and how they're being manipulated en masse. A very good friend of mine, Phil Giraldi, who was a station chief of the CIA in Turkey, for example, once defined it as sort of like the underground the political, military, intelligence establishment and then the banking, monetary establishment that kind of controlled the purse strings of the nation. And it kind of, he was station chief in Turkey for a while, so that's kind of why he used that. Personally, I use it as a consistent government that never really changes, no matter what administration or what political leaders you have put in place. It doesn't matter what color they are, what religion, what race, what nationality, what political party. There's certain things that just remain the same, and it's really the same people or peoples that control the purse strings, and it doesn't matter, what you call them. They control the money, they control the purse strings, they control the lobbying. So therefore, they control our foreign and domestic policy from the top on down, whether it's macro or micro.
Right. And
that's what I refer to as the deep state. And every country and every nation in the world has its own deep state.
Yeah, of course.
So it's not, isolated only to America. We just talk about it in the context of the United States because the United States is the most powerful currently nation in the world. Obviously, there's some rivals to that. You've got China, you've got the Russian Federation, you've got other nations and blocs in Eurasia, for example, as well as in parts of Africa. But the reality is that, and it goes to one of the articles that I've written about how the global oligarchs are now merging with the global communists. And they found that they, have a lot of interests that they share. And some of those interests are at the sort of at the expense of the masses of the world's people. And that's a very scary prospect.
Absolutely.
For people that are not in the know, if you will, because they absolutely have no power. They're led to believe that their votes matter. They're led to believe that their opinions matter. But in hindsight, they really don't. And the window is closing, and it's getting smaller and smaller every single day, every single year that goes by. And there's a very, very short amount of time for people to be made aware of what's happening. And hopefully they can save themselves and not wait for some messianic figure, if you will, to save them. That the people will be made aware of what's happening and are being made aware of the conspiracies that surround them, and that the world is becoming one, but the different countries and different nations and the different deep states around the world are merging into one force, one government, one economy, one currency, one religion, and the haves and have-nots. It won't just be monetary. The haves are realizing, finding out more and more that they really don't need the have-nots anymore.
Absolutely.
I mean, Henry Kissinger in his national security memo talked about useless eaters in his national security memo, for example.
Wow.
So it's a pretty scary prospect. You've got the Georgia Guidestones, for example, that was erected in the 70s about keeping the global population at 500 million, on the earth. How do we get to that point? For example, how do they want to get to that point?
Yeah.
So we're finding out more and more that maybe they don't need as many people on planet Earth as there are currently now, 8 or 9 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And why do they feel that way?
Raul, this is fascinating stuff, and I'm so glad that we have you here to go into detail. Now, I myself am a bit of a conspiracy theorist too, so this is something right up my alley and something that I've always enjoyed discussing. Again, whether or not you actually make a solidified claim is something else, but having that discussion I think is very profound and it's very beneficial. Now, Raul, and of course, use your own discretion. Guys, you know what you have to do. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that's where you have to go. You want to gather all of the information. There's no way around it, right? Pick up your copy today. But Raul, since we have you here on the line, I'd love to go into a little more detail with some of the conspiracies that you bring up and that you discuss within your latest book, Deep State Defector 4.
Sure. So the reality is that a common theme in my 4 books is about infiltration and manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
That things are not always what they seem. The reality is, for example, the federal courts and the state courts is a huge part of why I've written this book. There are literally cases out there, Supreme Court cases, for example, that prevent the masses from seeking justice, whether it's in civil rights matters or, unlawful incarceration or police brutality or misconduct or governmental misconduct or corruption. There are cases that prevent people from seeking, redress. Younger v. Harris, for example, is a Supreme Court case which prevents this federal court from looking into a state court matter, whether it's a family court matter, criminal court matter, a contract matter, wherein you're alleging corruption, where you're alleging mafia or organized criminal elements, where you're alleging that the judge or the law clerks are quote-unquote on the take, that there's organized crime or money exchange against bribery. I also talk about how the Federal Bureau of Investigation was founded by J. Edgar Hoover, for example, who was a Freemason and a Shriner, who, at the time in the 1920s was supposedly handpicked to fight communism or communist infiltration of the United States, but in fact turned the United States into a communist country and made it very similar to the USSR, Soviet Union, or the East German, the Gestapo, the German Gestapo and Stasi, by importing people like Marcus Wolf, who actually cut his teeth in the KGB and helped found the Stasi of Germany, and then came over and put his finishing touches on the Department of Homeland Security in the United States after September 11th in his old age. It was his crowning achievement. We imported a man like that to put the finishing touches on, people call it gang stalking. Well, it used to be called COINTELPRO, which is an outlawed FBI sort of program in the 1970s during the Frank Church hearings. The Senate went into it and found out that the FBI and the CIA were totally abusing their power and going after, civil rights civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or the Black Panthers, and sort of making their lives miserable, making them seem to be crazy or sexual deviants. And J. Edgar Hoover was leading the fray in that, sending death threats and "why don't you kill yourselves" letters, suicide letters to Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. Things of that nature were real. This is part of our American history, and were borrowed from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And now it's the word terrorism, for example. And it's not really so much racial or ethnic in this country as it is political bents, but it is communism nonetheless. And we talk about salami tactics in the book, about how the money power, the oligarchy, the bankers really don't really enjoy civil rights cases from the masses. They don't really like to get sued. They don't like complaints. They like to be A to B and rule like a dictatorship, like a tyranny. So they don't really have a lot of patience for that. So communism for them is a really convenient method of ruling the masses. And in this country, they have basically 4 or 5 groups that they've galvanized with money and power, and they don't really care about them per se, but they use them as useful idiots, sort of a thing, to divide and conquer, divide and rule,
right? Which
has, for example, been a British method in colonial times, using other, for example, the Muslims versus the Hindus in India, different types of, ethnic, groups against each other. Because while they're fighting each other, they're not fighting the oligarchy. They're
Absolutely.
not fighting the ruling powers, and they keep them busy that way. So we talk about the salami tactics. We talk about extreme feminism. We talk about extreme Zionism. We talk about extreme, certain extreme groups that are being funded by, essentially white male oligarchs, billionaires, trillionaires, to fight each other. And so that, look at this hand, and so you don't see what this hand is doing. Well, it's robbing you.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I've discussed in my book, because I've seen it up front, and how they use protected minorities, protected classes to mete out justice against their own people. So how does, for example, an African American or a person of color, when he's filing a civil rights lawsuit, how does he call a judge in front of him racist when that judge is black,
right.
African American, or a racial minority? When he smites him down and calls him a lunatic and says that his case is frivolous or fraudulent. How do you do that? I mean, this is immunity, but the reality is they put certain people out, or a woman, for example, alleging sexual harassment. How does she call a female judge, a sexist, or enabling sexual harassment when the judge looking down upon her is a female? Again, the same powers that be are putting her in positions of power. And again, this is not just the judiciary, federal or state. This is also the legislative. Whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, they're all serving the same masters.
Right.
The Koch brothers, for example, supposedly are billionaire right-wingers, and then you got George Soros, who's a billionaire left-winger. But at the same time, they agree on certain things.
Right. Similar
the
agenda.
Koch brothers and George Soros, for example. They agree on certain things, but that's the secret. That's what you're not supposed to know about.
Right. One of the clearest examples that come to my mind as you're talking and you're elaborating on all of this is, listen, we look at Barack Obama, right, and how that was utilized by a lot of conservative media to discourage and really talk against racism and prejudices in this country. Well, how can there be? We have a black president, right? So you have this opportunity to really be able to pull yourself up by the proverbial bootstrap, if you may, and work to that. So I absolutely hear everything that you're saying, and it completely resonates. And I think it's great examples. Rahul, to switch focus a little bit, because I know in your third installment, you focus on your experience within the Trump administration, or focus primarily on the Trump administration and his presidency, and some of the conspiracies that you had discovered within that. If you can, please go into some of the things that you found within that, and talk to us a little bit more about the third installment.
Well, the reason that a lot of people had a lot of faith in him was because he was literally a bull in a china shop. There's a lot of things about him that many people didn't like, including myself, the author. But we felt it was good to have a bull in a china shop to sort of mix up and shake it up after sedimentation, if you will, fermentation.
Absolutely.
For decades and decades. We figured that what could be worse? Having the same, whether having a Republican establishment guy or a Democrat established person up there kind of selling the same snake oil, or having somebody in there that was just totally unpredictable. As a protest vote, if you will. So on one hand, we were terrified and horrified and scared to death of Trump. But on the other hand, we were hoping that him bumping around in the middle of the night with no lights on trying to figure out his way and how to run the country, would illuminate some of the long hidden conspiracies or things that we take that the government takes for granted, the masses don't know about, and that happened quite a bit. And so that was a good thing. Whether or not he was good for another 4 more years, we're not sure. But the reality is, during his time as president, a lot of groups, both left and right, were able to exchange information, share notes, and really kind of draw them out of the woodwork, the sort of oligarchical powers that be. Whether it was bumbling around or whatever the case may be. But he was more of a protest, chaotic vote, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's what his value was, I think. Not to insult him, but I think at the same time, I think he meant well. But I think every president means well. But the reality is that some of them, are more apt to swallow their pride and kind of deliver for the oligarchs and the puppet masters, if you will, rather than fight them.
Rahul, thank you very much for all the information that you've relayed thus far. Probably the most important question of today that I'm going to ask now, and it's very broad, and I don't know if you can give a solidified or a direct answer with this, but I'm gonna try, so entertain me here for a second. The knowledge that you're putting within the books are fantastic. And again, as I stated when we first started, right, you are very well aware, and as you said, you almost felt obligated to put this information out there, right? So people can understand what is going on. Now, at that point, it's up to them to make a decision on what to do with that information. Now, to pose this to you, Rahul, because we know knowledge without action, doesn't really get us anywhere. So what are you hoping to see people do once they discover this information from your book?
It's a great question. Knowledge, awareness, the light, being turned on, which is an analogy that I've used quite a bit.
Absolutely.
I'm hoping that the bad actors will be shamed and cease the system doing their bad deeds voluntarily, in the sense that they'll realize that they're being used, and I'm hoping that the masses will legally and equitably fight back, using the courts, using their vote, using lobbying power, grassroots, all peaceful mechanisms on both sides to achieve change and to evolve as a human race, and realize that we have to share this planet and that we have a way to go before we can have a one world order. I don't want to live in a one world order right now where the people that are currently holding all the purse strings and money power are the ones ruling the world. I feel like it's a very imperfect world right now. I feel like there's value systems that are not being respected. I feel like that people are being run over, literally, figuratively. I think I think that there's rampant violence in the world of the haves over the have-nots, and I think value systems are being run over. And I think we need a little bit more time before we have a new world order. So I believe in a multipolar world, and I believe in a multi-ethnic, multiracial world where everyone has an equal voice. Unfortunately, the money power and the lobbying and political power is concentrated in the hands of the few, and it's not very equitably divided. So we need more time. But I feel like the power oligarchy structures that currently exist are really trying to microwave this process. They see the end game and they want to get there. And they don't care how many millions and billions of people that they murder in the process, through war, through pathogens, through disease, through weapons of mass destruction, whatever the case may be. They can't wait, and they want to have it now. And unfortunately, the cake isn't baked yet. It needs a little bit more time. We're not mature enough as a people yet.
Right.
So I'm hoping that people wake up and talk to each other on the internet and have dinner conversations. There's a saying of the butterfly. There's a Chinese phrase about the butterfly analogy, that the butterfly's wings can create a typhoon or a tornado halfway around the world. The beats of the butterfly. wing, and I'm hoping that will occur. And that people have a conversation, that we evolve, and that we evolve to a better place. And instead of bullying and pushing people around, or nation states, or religions, or races, or cultures, or people with less money, I'm hoping that that it sort of will diffuse and merge into one organically and naturally, with awareness and education, rather than bullying.
Beautifully said, Rahul. Beautifully said. Listen, I had another question that I wanted to ask. Honestly, it doesn't even make sense to go there. The way you just answered that final question, I can think of no better way to close out of such a fantastic interview. Rahul, this has truly been a pleasure. Guys, you know what you have to do. I'm going to say it one more time, even though I know I don't have to. Let's re-impress it again. Here on the line with Rahul Manchanda. We just finished discussing his wonderful book, Deep State Defector 4. Remember, go and pick up the first 3 installments in the series. You surely will not be disappointed. Amazon and Barnes & Noble are where you have to go. Rahul, again, this has been such a pleasure, such an honor. Thank you for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Thank you so much for this honor, and thank you for letting me speak to you as well. It's truly an honor. Thank you very much.
Come and be a guest with us on People of Distinction.